Hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation. My name is Bongani Mncube. I always bring you the most relevant interactions about what's hippity happening at our University of Johannesburg. And to solidify that, today we're going to be talking about the VR experience. Joining me to talk more about it is the visionary behind it, Izak. Izak, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, after seeing your work, I'm like, everything can be reconstructed, actually, I think. Like in terms of reality, virtual reality, you know, I feel like you and I now might be sitting in Sophiatown. You can put us in your VR experience. Yeah. Well, Izak, I'd like you to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name's Izak Potgieter. I'm just from Mpumalanga and then moved to Joburg, as it tends to happen. I first studied architecture and then I worked as an architect. Tried to pivot a little bit from the industry. And I've always kind of had three main interests in my life. And it's amazing to me that they've come together in ways that I never expected them to. Yep. Architecture, technology, and history. And so from that, I've started making video games as a student. And that has kind of just led me down a path which has brought me to this seat today.
Well, take us through this process, the marrying of those three that you've always had interest in: history, architecture, and technology. This particular project, let's start with history. Sophiatown. Why Sophiatown for a project?
So I was looking at how this isn't the first time something historical has been remade in VR, right? And I was looking at how these things are usually made. Usually they scan a site which already exists. And I always use the Colosseum as an example because there's a VR experience there. You can scan it as it is today as a ruin, see that in VR wherever you are in the world. You can rebuild what it looked like from the ruins, see that wherever you want. And that's kind of it. So my question was, what about sites which no longer physically exist? There aren't ruins left. Is there a way to actually represent that? And my research has shown that 2/3 of these projects, history in VR, are in Europe. Often not even done by Europeans, just in Europe, from people from universities all over the world. And 1/3 in Italy, strangely enough. Italy's got all of these. And I think it's because they've got so many still existing and well-maintained sites. But for us in a place like South Africa, a lot of our historical places physically don't exist, but they still exist within people's memories, right? People are still around that remember this, and a lot of them are still living the effects of this. So we asked ourselves, can we actually turn memory into space? Is that possible? And that's kind of been the leading question for this. And Sophiatown was a case in point. It's representative of, you know, a lot of different places. District 6, Cairo Manor. Even where I grew up in, there was in the town I grew up in, there was a neighborhood close to the CBD, which was demolished during apartheid to create a golf course, but actually to separate the township from the city. No one knows about that. I found this library book last taken out in 2004. That's how I know about it. I'm like, that's our history. It's in every single town. We have these spaces which physically don't exist, but they exist here. And I just felt like VR can maybe do something about that. And Sophiatown is, I'd say, sped for that, right? Because as these things are done right now, Sophiatown is unrepresentable. And that seems like a state of affairs that we can't have.
And of course, just to get also our viewers up to speed, Izak here created a VR experience that showcases Sophiatown. So Izak, back to you, it's like now, the date, the time frame that you have the Sophiatown, it is of course during the apartheid times, whereby it was one of the only places that is artistic, vibrant, but also multiracial in the country. So the reconstruction of this, the information, the data, as you're saying, that is stories. So did you maybe conduct interviews? How did you go about this research?
Yeah, so we were looking at pre-demolition, which means early 60s, late 50s. And it was one of these few places where people were allowed to own land, no matter what race they were, and where a lot of different people lived together close to the city. We looked at what we could find. Stories, photos, films, not that much. Okay, it exists. Sophiatown's quite famous. But interestingly, a lot of the films, pictures, they are after demolition itself. And we really didn't want to make the story of Sophiatown just a story of its demolition. That's kind of like, if I told the story of your childhood, I make it about the day you moved out of your house. I mean, that's not,
Kill the whole story.
And so we got what we could, and then we went and did interviews. And we worked with the Trevor Huddleston Center in Sophiatown. They've got decades-long relationships with former residents who come constantly for events, and they've got relationship with them. We show them our little proof of concept to show them what the Sphinx is actually going to be, to show that it's going to be for the museum, bring value to the museum, which they, have a good relationship with. And then we did interviews. We did interviews with around 6 people to start with.
Yeah.
There was a good age gap. The gap between the youngest and the oldest person was about 20 years. So we've got someone who remembers it in their late 20s and someone who remembers it as a child, different genders, races, all of that, religions. So we got a good sample size from it. And then hours and hours of interviews. That's where we got our data from.
Exactly. And having that data now, I think that is where the architect part and the technology part will come in to construct that now.
Yeah.
But in before that, it's like how they're now with this data that you're now having. What is the atmosphere, from the interviews? Interviews can be quite emotional, especially if you're talking history and what's the dark history of South Africa to an extent, but you want the good part of Sophiatown. How was that experience for you?
I had an assistant to Lani help me.
Yeah.
So we were 2 of them. We were 2 interviewers. So we could also speak and understand like most of South Africa's official languages. So we had them able to speak in whatever language they wanted, and a lot of Tsotsital went around, which was great because they never really have an opportunity to speak that until they come together.
Yeah.
And we had group interviews to make sure that they're kind of coming back and talking to old friends or acquaintances or whatever. So it was a very, how would I say, gezellig. It was very, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we tried to ask as few questions as possible. Just kind of keep it on topic and just let people speak. Because people have this idea of their own life history and they want to communicate that.
Indeed.
And we had no problem. All the interviews went on longer than we planned, which is great. And we had no problem with that. So there were moments of happiness, remembering playing in the street or their families or their friends or whatever it was. There were very heavy moments, of course, thinking of the demolition. We never once asked about the demolition, but everyone brought it up in very different ways and in very personal ways and in ways which I think, you had someone who kind of was still very upset today because they could prove that they own that land and they were never given that land back. For example, you had, it was very personal. It was very multifaceted, and it was complex.
Yeah.
No one was just upset. No one was just happy. No one was. It was complex and human. And I think doing the interviews gets us to engage with our history on that level. And it also helped us to not make value judgments. We didn't have tick boxes. Tell me about the Odin. Tell me about whatever. Because we can get stuck in these kind of famous, these hit lists, This is what Sophiatown was. Let's learn more. No, they were like someone just talk about their garden for a long time. Exactly. Like the peaches in their tree and I miss having a garden. And I mean, or playing in the street or these small things. Yeah. And the big things as well. We're not pretending the big things didn't happen. And they brought it up. And I think, that changes how we look at history.
Taking that data now, back to the data itself, with you of course hold a master's in architecture. Having that and getting onto, your computer where you start to do the magic. How did that come about?
This is the real moment that I think is the innovation of this project. But only people who read my papers will see it. We transcribed everything. Okay, I tried to make no value judgment about this is important, this is not important. Yeah. Because if you remember something for 70 years, it's important, no matter what it is. We transcribed everything and translated whatever we needed to translate into English. And I took note. Who's speaking? What are they saying? And what place are they talking about? Yeah. Those 3 things were applied to every single sentence. So I then bunched it all together. Okay, everyone is talking about the Odin Cinema. Let's put it together. What are they saying? What events are they talking about? Yeah. And what spatial identifiers are within this event? And we could literally extract those little moments. Oh, that's what the seats look like. That's how you sat. That's where you remember being. That's how you remember entering. And cross-reference that with whatever images we had to enrich that representation. So it's very scientific, actually.
It is.
If you say, why is that cup green?
Exactly.
I should be able to go and tell you, paragraph 197, line 3, there he says it's a green cup. I've been very rigorous about that because I'm trying to make as few kind of extrapolations or interpretations as possible, because I don't know, I wasn't there, you know, and try to really to that level of detail build what they say, because this isn't a video game, this is history, and if we misrepresent it, make it a bit like a Disneyland Sophiatown, this is how maybe the future generations will remember Sophiatown. So I've been really, this process is how I try to get that right.
Yeah, because you've gone beyond just painting a picture, you've reconstructed, you know, having to be that is a VR experience. You have voices. How did you do that actually? Because there's a voice there, people are singing, you feel the atmosphere. It's not just seeing the buildings, but just the atmosphere as well.
There was a great film, which is no longer under copyright, called Come Back Africa.
All right.
Interesting film. It was shot in Sophiatown.
Wow.
In the 50s.
That was before the reconstruction, right? The demolition.
Before the demolition.
Yeah.
And it was these American filmmakers. They came to South Africa saying they're doing a documentary.
Wow.
And once the apartheid government realized they're shooting in Sophiatown, they're speaking to Kantemba and Miriam Makeba and these kinds of things. They kicked them out, so they quickly had to wrap up.
Yeah.
And that film still exists. Oh. So we were able to take some background sound recordings, use some of the images from that. That has been a great help to just get some historical recordings and some sense of the atmosphere, and, you know, beyond pictures. That has been a big help.
It literally triangulates everything that you've gotten, you know. It shows that you're in a good direction. What you're representing is true, because the interviews are also saying this, and you have old footage that is also like kind of substantiating the whole thing.
Exactly. So, and that's also the thing with memory slippery.
Oh yeah, true.
But I don't think memory should be discounted just because it can't be proven to be completely objective, because there are ways to give it credibility. And I always feel, if I remember falling on my green bicycle when I was 5, and if I go in my time machine, it was a blue bicycle when I was 4, does it really matter that much? There's still something there.
A bicycle
there's still something there.
There's a key character.
That's part of your life story or whatever.
Yeah, and it may have changed your life to an extent. Yeah, it's contributed.
Not me on the bicycle, but, you know, it's just my example. I wasn't traumatized. I still ride my bicycle.
Yeah.
And that triangulation gives it that credibility. So we had groups, and that helped to say, no, that's not how I remember that. That's how I remember that. But then also we had separate groups. So if this group and this group agrees, then we know there also wasn't kind of a group think going on, or everyone leaning to one idea, so on. And we were able to cross-reference, like you said.
Yeah.
This group spoke about the Atlas Bakery, a place we have one image of, but everyone remembers. This group can give us the same descriptions, and then it must be true.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, indeed. And in this VR experience, is there a specific establishment that you find interesting in it? Maybe let's say a pub or something. Is there an establishment in the VR that you like? This one was like maybe a good place during Sophiatown?
For me personally, I found it so interesting to find spaces that I would never have thought were interesting. Because Sophiatown's been done before, right? We know about the Odin and the back of the moon Shabin and the 39 steps Shabin and all of that. There are some landmarks, but there were some people that just spoke about a field outside of Sophiatown where a lot happened. It's just a field. They would roll down the hill in tires or collect scrap metal to get money for a movie theater, or there was a mud pool, and in some days the white kids from Westin would come and like kind of claim it and throw each other with stones, and then sometimes the black kids or the colored kids from from Sophiatown would come and like these mini skirmishes going on, and they would play like that, and it was a weird moment where there was this playing together, but also I'm like, that's so interesting, and that's not in the history books right now. So it was those unknown spaces that I found really fascinating.
Yeah, it is, because of course now we as we're saying that it was a multiracial space, but in terms of how do they live together, you have your Africans, you have coloreds, you have Chinese, you have Indians. How did they correlate, and how did it happen? And to find that, it's really like, wow, interesting to find out.
And it was so complex. You know, there was one person who spoke about he had to leave Sophiatown when he was grade 2 or standard, whatever, I can't remember.
Okay.
And his whole life cannot remember who was black, who was colored, who was white, who was Tswana, who was Zulu. He's been trying to remember, he cannot remember because it did not feature. as something in his mind. Or we had the lady speaking about going to church. And she said, we are Christian, finishing klaar. And then later, an hour later, she talks about every week she went to help cook at the mosque with her friend. I'm like,
Christian.
and you're not seeing any kind of
difference.
Incoherence here. There's just something there where it's like, no, we're all people because we live so close to each other. We have to see each other as people, and we do. And it's when we don't have any contact that we start, imposing other ideas about who someone is and villainizing them and so on. And I think it was that pressure cooker quality. It was this little non-white area in a sea of designated white areas in Joburg, which ironically did the opposite of what apartheid wanted, forced everyone to live together.
Exactly.
And that created a situation which was very unique in that way.
Very unique, indeed. And now, I just want to find out, how long did it take you to...
There's a long and a short answer.
Give me a medium one.
I've been working on this since 2021, but I got a 6-month grant, and I was working with the UJ Fab Lab straight out of Masters. They said, VR in Joburg, let's do it.
Let's do it. Go for it.
I said, okay. They first wanted to do a digital twin of Joburg. That was the idea. And I felt, I don't want to remake all of Joburg. That's not going to happen in 6 months. Then there was ideas to do something with the Melville copies, because there's an ancient Tswana village there. But that proved difficult. So I kind of had this idea of, how is this not a gimmick? We can bring back spaces which no longer exist. You can go to the Melville copies now. I was there last week. You can, Joburg's here. But this is a space which physically no longer exists. And maybe that's the value of VR. So that's what led to that. We had a 6-month project in 2021 where I made this, and then it sat. Then it sat for about a year. I've exhibited it where I could. And there were 2 turning points. One was the Trevor Huddleston Museum saw it, and they were really excited about it. Because unknowingly, they've kind of been looking for something like this since 2018, which they said. I don't think they knew it would look like this.
Look like that,
Because I don't think this is seen as even a possibility at this point.
At that time,
Right?
For real.
But they were really excited about it and really supportive of it, which was great for me, because if they don't see the value in it, what's the value in it? And the second was the UJ GS4IR bursary.
Oh, yes.
I got a bursary to do my PhD on this. I wasn't planning on doing a PhD, but okay. I said, okay, the PhD can fund me to finish this.
Yes.
And that started middle of 2022. So then I kind of resumed with it. And now I've done the interviews, and I can integrate all of that into what I've already built. And I'm hoping to have it done next year.
Wow.
So that was, I hope, a medium length answer.
It is. It's clear even. It's clear. But of course, why did you want to do a PhD though? That is my question, I think, from that.
I didn't. I wasn't planning to. I just wanted funding for this, and the bursary was a great way to do it. But I'm so glad I'm doing the PhD, because this is complicated. It's a complicated history. It's me doing it, which I need to deal with as well. And I think that's helped me make sure I build in as much distance as possible. Even the train of thought, of the sequence in which I tell their stories, we've tried to preserve. So there's a whole theoretical way to go about it. And then also proving the value of this. It's been great for me to do all this research. And I even look at the first one I made and think, I want to change that. I do want to change that from the research. So it's actually been amazing.
And actually solidifies it as a scientific element, because it becomes scientific with research, of course. And now, is passion speaking for you in terms of history, but also technology to an extent is passion as well, because you studied architecture, but you've been practical in terms of, because to me, you really are more technological in as much as you're in architecture, but to be able to utilize the softwares that you're using and to construct that. Tell me more about this passion of technology and what really came about it. Did you also get on the wave of a fourth industrial revolution? Or when you're growing up, you're always like from the Samsungs, early phones, Motorola, you're always digital, always up to that?
I think my grandma always says I grew up with a laptop on my what do you call it, my lap? And I've always been into video games and that kind of thing, and that's been a continuous interest in mine and eventually making it.
Indeed.
And as an architect, I'm actually not very practical. I've never been. I've been much more speculative. Like, I'm still not sure how big a brick is. Like, it wasn't the part of architecture I enjoyed. So I enjoyed making architecture in the virtual space.
In the virtual space.
And because you can do what you want without worrying about contractors,
That's
how
my
deep the
thing. I don't
foundation
want to
needs
ask.
to be.
I bet you don't even
I just
have
want to make
boots.
the space. I don't want to deal with the real life consequences
Yeah.
because it's trench warfare. I tell you, I've got an architect I really admire. He always calls it trench warfare because it's such a fight to get your idea out. And it's so much nicer in digital realm to just make it and there you go. So I had this interest in video games and architecture that you can move around in because for me in architecture also there might be a tendency to view it as an object. It's something you place, something you look at, but the real magic of architecture is how it gets used, right? How people actually interact with it and how people change it over time. Joburg's a great example of a city which is going through many different lives and has changed beyond recognition for its original intent. And I felt video games is a good way to bring that across because now you're interacting with buildings. And that has kind of been a starting point that has led to this kind of way of thinking.
And with this way of thinking, with the VR experience, I'm thinking soccer now with VAR, but with VR experience, virtual reality, how has been the reception? You know, how are you feeling with the reception?
More than I expected,
Yeah.
and really humbling actually, because it's nerve-wracking sometimes because, you know, I didn't plan on doing this. It kind of, there's a series of events that led me to doing this work, but I feel like it's valuable work nonetheless.
Indeed.
And it's work that actually cannot happen in a decade from now because the people I interviewed are in their 90s sometimes, and they've never been interviewed before, which is great because we could add that to the archive, and that's a contribution we have already made, which I feel really good about. But the reception has been good.
It's been great.
And the most important to me was the museum is happy with it.
Yes.
They know what they're talking about. They understand this history. And the former residents we interviewed are happy with it and where it's going. And I almost feel like I can deal with any criticism as long as those two groups are happy with this and think there's value in this and support it. Especially the former residents, because I mean, it's their stories being told, right?
Being told, exactly.
But the reception has been good, and I always appreciate constructive criticism because I'm still making it.
Yeah, true.
And a lot of what I'm doing comes from that constructive criticism still. Even exhibiting last week, there were some good points where I was like, yeah, you're right, that and that and that. And it gets to small details like, don't use that bottle, use that bottle. That's how the bottle looked. I'm like, yes, I want those small details. But the actual concept and what we're doing, there's been questions and curiosity about why I'm doing it, which is fair. No, there has, and that's fair. But for the most part, it's just been very, people get really excited about it.
Oh, yeah, it actually reminds me of my research as well, you know? Like, what makes you skilled or adequate to actually do that investigation or that research, in your case, to represent Sophiatown? Which is a good question. It's good. It's critical thinking. Well, I also want to locate, as you said, right? UJ has been a part of you. You've done your master's, you've done degree, but also in this journey to actually come up with the final product. What has been the university's role, probably, in assistance in that?
The university has definitely made us possible. I don't think they're aware of to what extent, because it's been individual actors and departments that have just picked it up and provided a stepping stone at crucial points.
Indeed.
But UJ has absolutely made this possible. Firstly, my training at the GSA, Master School of Architecture, has prepared me very well for this kind of work. And I constantly go back to what I was taught there. So that has been amazing. The Fab Lab, which is where this project started with Denver Hendricks and Claudius Shona, we worked together on that 6-month kind of proof of concept, I almost called it, which then has led to what you see today and which is still evolving. And to kind of give a 23-year-old leeway to do something like this.
Yeah.
I don't know of any other university that would take that risk, and I'm always thankful for that. And then, you just provided me with a lot of interesting for our projects which have pushed me, and I've been able to come aboard with the Metaverse Research Unit of Dr. Herman Mayberg, for example. And that's kind of helped me in the gaps when there wasn't funding to continue this project, to stay in this field and to stay engaged. And then also the GES bursary is how I'm funding this now. And that is from UJ. So the reception from UJ, even being here today on UJTV, they've really, whenever I kind of ran out of road, it's like you just like, no, here's some more. You can keep going. You can keep going. You can keep going. And it's, I don't know where else I would have got that.
Indeed. And also the supervisors. I know the supervisors played a key role as well. The inspiration of it, you are being supervised by one of the experts in the space that you are in. Tell me a little bit about that as well.
So I'm working with Professor Anthony Mbala, who's amazing. He's the head of multimedia at VARA, and Dr. Herman Mayberg, who's running the Metaverse Research Unit. And then Denver Hendricks, who helped start this. He's a technical supervisor, but he's now in England. So he's left UJ at the moment. That has been great because very diverse team. And everyone that works in VR is not from VR because there's no VR degree yet. So we've got people from engineering who do VR, architecture like me, wherever. I always say it's kind of like, it's like drawing. You don't study drawing. You study art and then you use drawing. You study engineering and then you use drawing differently. You study architecture and use drawing differently.
I like that analogy.
And VR is the same. Someone from marketing is going to use VR differently, whatever. So it's a very, my supervisors are from very different fields, from very technical and scientific to much more on the kind of artistic side. And then even some support from the GSA still, and Dr. Mark Raymond, who's been advising a little bit there from my alma mater, which support I've also appreciated. So many voices. So many voices. And that helps a lot because there's the technical side, there's the artistic side, there's the theoretical side.
Exactly.
And I feel like that's been really enriching.
You're supported by greatness from all angles, actually. It's actually good to have that diversity and be surrounded by people from different things. You can always lean on the lighter note. You can go to a more technical, more stressful, which is really good.
And I mean, this is a deeply disciplinary medium at this point of time, because what does VR do? It brings together coding and 3D modeling and sound design and whatever you can imagine. It brings together so many disciplines into one thing, which is also the magic of it, right? You're able to have film and video and interviews and sound and all of that at once. But now you have to do all of that to get there. Which has been
it is amazing though.
A big learning curve for me. So the support has been great for all of that.
You mentioned something that almost blew my mind. You're 23. When were you 23? You're 23 this year.
No.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay.
I'm 28 these days.
Okay.
But I was 23 when I started with this.
Like, wow. That's really amazing work. I think that I would like you to incorporate towards the end of our interview. I usually have a question that I'll ask you, don't worry. But I think before that question should be what the future plans for the project. What you can include maybe yourself as well. What is the plan now? Where do you wish to take this project? And
So I want to finish this with my PhD, and that's a good deadline to have because then the funding runs out. And I've kind of got everything I need. I've done my interviews, I've done my transcripts, I've done my analysis, and I'm starting to now build the final version, which I'm so excited about it.
And you also got all eyes on you right now.
I've got, it's all there. So I'm hoping to have it done next year, and as planned to give ownership over to the museum. The only thing that I still need to get it to fall in place is some sponsorship for the equipment, which is the VR equipment, which isn't actually that much money. That's the easy part. The software is the expensive part.
The software, okay.
The headsets, they are like people in Clifton who've got the equipment needed in their living room. It's not like a big expensive thing, but that aside, the museum is actually an NGO at the end of the day, and they work with grants and support. So, if you go there now, They have some things, some artifacts to look at, but the main thing is walk-in tours of Sophiatown. And of course, Sophiatown was demolished and rebuilt as a kind of typical neighborhood.
Exactly, yeah.
So they walk with a flip file and they tell you, this used to be there. Here where these Yorkies are barking at us. This was the biggest cinema in Africa.
Wow.
Here at the KFC, this was where Miriam Makeba first sat. And I mean, that's crazy.
You're looking at a KFC and you're like, Miriam Makeba,
Yeah, like, but
sorry,
I mean-
you're painting the picture, yeah.
And they did with a flip file. And now you can imagine school
Yeah.
groups and you pass the flip file around and it's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
So I think this is a way for them to make some income for themselves apart from the
tours themselves, yeah.
the tours and from
the
the being reliant on funding,
Yeah.
which I think is very
Yeah.
important. And that was important for us, that they actually benefit from this, that we're not just taking this to some museum in Germany or something, and
Exactly,
it needs to, because they do a lot of community programs and that kind of thing, and they're an interesting museum because they're almost more of a community center than a museum sometimes, and which is great because how are museums relevant? They need to be relevant to the people still living there. And I think it's really interesting. Exactly. It can't just be, people lose interest if it becomes just for tourists or whatever. So I think it's really great what they're doing there, and this can help with that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Really, really. And personally, of course, you're targeting a PhD, and you've been through the most of this. And now, my favorite question of this interview. So our show airs on Mondays. We usually have a thing that we call Monday Motivation. So we just want you to speak into that camera, purely motivate. Say something to someone out there. Then someone wants to punch far above their weight. Maybe they're doing accounting, but they have interest in a certain thing. Let's say maybe technology as well. How can they actually be something like you, the motivation?
Yeah. We really underestimate ourselves as South Africans. We really deeply underestimate ourselves and where we fit in the global order of who's innovative, who's on the cutting edge. We have got so many advantages that we do not realize because we know how to work with what we have. And we know how to find little innovative niches and make things happen with little resources, which is very rare in America, Europe, wherever it is, these places we look up on. There, it's such a entrenched and complicated and expensive process where we just kind of do things because we have to. And also because we feel like we're here, and we're trying to be here, but in reality we're here and now we're aiming to be there. And I think as soon as South Africans really start seeing themselves like that, a lot can come out. And also, every piece of software I used was free. YouTube. I learned this from YouTube. I didn't take a course. Just no course exists.
Exactly, for virtual reality.
You can do it. It's all actually there, and the technologies are recent, and they've been made free quite recently, and it's been quite a revolution. And you can just kind of jump in whatever you want to do, and then I will end up by plagiarizing someone else who I really admire. Songezo Zibi said, "What must you do if you want to contribute to this country? Okay, we all want to contribute, but we don't know how because there's so much that needs to be done, and which is a curse and a blessing because that's where the innovation comes from."
True.
It's find one thing you're really passionate about and one institute that agrees with that passion and see how you can contribute to that. And that's what I've tried to do with the Trevor Huddleston Center. And I think you end up, the possibility is there to make much more of an impact than just kind of abstractly trying to contribute. If you find one thing you're passionate about, and everyone's passionate about something.
Indeed.
And you tie yourself into an institution that also has that passion and help uplift the institution, that can go further than you realize.
And indeed, look how you've came. I think yourself, you're also blown away. Like, is this me? I didn't think we'd make this far.
No, I'm constantly surprised by where this is going.
And,
it's amazing.
It's amazing, man. Well, Izak, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really...
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, dear viewers. This was my conversation with Izak. Trust me, he says push yourself to the best as you can. Passion is key, and also your deep heritage can enrich you to do greater things. Don't give up. My name is Bongani. See you on the next episode.